Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM. We're on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or you can stream us online at www.saga960am.ca, or you can get all my podcasts and video casts on briancrombie.com, and then just search under video casts or podcasts. Tonight, we've got a fascinating person that I think is going to be very relevant all the time, but particularly during this time of COVID-19 when a lot of us are communicating virtually. And that's Deborah Austin, who is a communication expert. I think it's interesting because she's had a journey that is kind of fascinating because she was an introvert and now she's teaching communication. So Deborah Austin, how are you? Welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour.
I'm doing wonderful, Brian. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much. So Deborah, how did you travel from becoming an introvert to becoming a professional speaker consultant?
Well, Brian, first of all, thank you for having me on your show. I truly believe that life is a journey. And as someone who is an introvert, I'm just here to tell your audience members that with hard work and dedication, anyone can become an effective communicator. As a speaker, a writer, and a workshop facilitator, my journey, believe it or not, started back in high school. I was a person who was very academically inclined. I loved to read. And then when I entered university, my mother encouraged me to join Toastmasters because she thought that I was a little bit insular, and she thought it would really help me to improve my communication skills. So when I eventually went out into the workforce and embarked upon my career, I would have the communication skills necessary. And one of the things that I love about Toastmasters, for your audience members who don't know, it's an international organization that helps individuals with their leadership and their communication skills. So members come together weekly and they work on speeches and presentations. And so by being involved in Toastmasters, I would hone my communication skills week after week with a very supportive environment with my fellow club members, to the point where I had leadership positions within Toastmasters, and I went on to win several public speaking competitions, which was very exciting for someone who was introverted. And just through my journey through Toastmasters and other nonprofit work that I did, I ended up coaching and mentoring people until I became a certified coach. And it really is my passion, helping people to elevate their communication and leadership skills.
Why do you think being an effective communicator is so important?
It is important because fundamentally people judge you by how you communicate, and you could be the most brilliant person, technically competent, but if you're not able to get your message across to someone, it will be very difficult for someone to invest in you. So say, for example, an employer, if there were two equally qualified candidates who had the requisite IT skills, but one of them was much more effective in terms of their communication skills, they would be able to position themselves in the interview and make the employer understand why they were the ideal candidate.
So tell me, and give me an example, if you could, of where communication, other than job interviews, ends up being critically important.
Well, for example, if you're a small business owner or an entrepreneur, you're constantly out there, whether you're picking up the phone or you have meetings with clients. How you communicate your business and the value that you bring is important in order to secure business. And even the way that you communicate to yourself, you want to ensure that you're doing positive communication and you're encouraging yourself as well. So there's a variety of contexts in which communication is so important, not only in a job interview, for business, in terms of volunteer work, and even within families, communication is so important.
So you told me that you won some public speaking contests. Did you ever have a big snafu up on stage?
Well, the key thing to life, Brian, I think, is making it look as if it didn't happen. I certainly did, but the audience did not know it. And I think that's part of high performance. The only person who will really know is yourself. Let's say you had a sales presentation, or even just a general work presentation, and let's say you skipped a segment of your speech and you're like, oh my goodness, I forgot that point. Chances are the audience won't know, but if you highlight it and you say, oh darn, I forgot that segment, then your audience members will know. But if you just gracefully and elegantly skip over it and then maybe come back to it, chances are the audience won't know. So I think we've all had our moments and our snafus, but it's the way that you're able to cover it in an elegant way will determine how the audience perceives you.
We're chatting tonight with Deborah. Deborah Austin, who is a professional communications consultant and speaker. And we're going to take a short break for messages and come back for more. And she's going to tell us about several different skills on how to become a great communicator. Stay with us.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 AM. We're here with Deborah Austin tonight, who is a professional communications consultant and speaker. She's been trained through Toastmasters. She's got a coaching certificate, and now what she does is provide one-on-one coaching as well as workshops and seminars to people that want to become better communicators. Deborah, you said that there were 3 obstacles to becoming an effective communicator. What do you mean by that? What are they?
Well, Brian, I think there's actually several obstacles, but I'm just going to highlight 3 tonight for you. And one of the key ones is when people speak in public, they have fear or perhaps a fear of rejection. And when you're speaking public, you're putting yourself out there. And I think the reason why people have that fear is because they don't have a baseline in terms of understanding how they present. And what I mean by baseline is that if you really don't have a sense of how you present, it's very hard to improve. So for example, what I recommend with some of my clients is that they record themselves on video. So instead of the fear sort of being out there, they can actually see themselves on video and they can use the video as a tool. So one of the obstacles is really not knowing how you actually present on screen. So that is definitely one of the key obstacles that I would encourage people to record themselves on video so that they can overcome it and they have a bit of objective information.
Sort of like the old recommendation to practice your speech in front of a mirror.
Absolutely. The more practice that you can get, it's much better for you in terms of how you perform. And the second obstacle is not knowing what I call the fundamentals of public speaking. And Brian, there's hundreds, perhaps thousands of books out there on communication and public speaking. And when I work with my clients, I actually go very granular. So I list 12 fundamentals of public speaking, but just in the interest of your audience, I'll just name a few. So one of the fundamentals would be not knowing your purpose, your speech purpose. Is it to inform? Is it to persuade? Is it to entertain or inspire? Not knowing your purpose really handicaps you as a speaker because you're not able to communicate your message effectively. So another fundamental public speaking would be not knowing your audience. For example, what is the demographics of your audience? Is it mainly males or females? What is the age range of the people in your audience? And just doing a little bit of research can really help you to build that rapport and communicate the messages that you want to convey. So not knowing your audience really impairs people, and I consider that to be a fundamental. You must do audience research if you really want to connect with your audience.
And so if you have a canned speech that you do often, you would really recommend adjusting it fairly dramatically for different audiences.
For sure, absolutely. So let's say you had a canned speech and you spoke to business executives. You would tailor that if you're going to present that to millennials. So they understand some of the references that you might want to use. And I think people don't spend enough time in terms of doing research. And a great tool to use to do some of that research is SurveyMonkey. If you're able to, it's a survey tool. And if you have maybe some email addresses of people who you're going to present to, send them a short survey about what do they hope to get out of your presentation. And then based on the data that you collect, you'll be surprised how you're able to tailor your speeches to actually meet their needs. So knowing your audience is key. Another fundamental is nonverbal communication. And again, I could break this down for you, but things such as eye contact, your body language, your gestures, smiling is a great way that you can connect with people as well. And sometimes people get nervous. They're like, well, I have this hardcore business audience and I don't want them to seem that I'm too enthusiastic or not serious, but it's very important to smile so that you can connect with your audience.
So I've always found, I do a fair amount of speaking myself, I've always found that if you actually recognize a few people in the audience, and if it's an audience you don't know, go ahead of time and meet some of the people so you can and find out what they're all about, and so you can comment and reference to them when you're speaking. And or if it's an audience where you know some people in the audience, recognize them, give them a shout out, talk about how something they're doing is relevant to the topic that you're doing, and that envelops not only them but almost everyone else in the conversation. I ended up having a fascinating discussion with a guy who was the advanced person for the Cardinal from Toronto, and he took him around to a whole bunch of different sites. And he said he always went into the room ahead of time and always found the youngest person and the oldest person in the crowd, the congregation, the audience, so that the Cardinal could then recognize young people and old people. And so sometimes when you recognize the most important or the richest or the whatever, people feel jealous, but everyone will appreciate when you recognize the oldest person and the youngest person. I thought that was an interesting rule that he had, maybe not appropriate for everyone, but certainly appropriate for a man of the cloth.
Brian, that is an excellent point. And if you can arrive half an hour early just to greet some members of your audience, that's a great way to build rapport with audience members, as well as you said, you can actually reference things about your audience members in your speech, and that's a great way to connect with your audience. And it actually helps the speaker as well to not feel as nervous if they're speaking in front of a group that they obviously don't know. So it's a great rapport building technique. It's a great way to get some information about your audience members and actually to build the connection. And I would highly recommend for people before they speak to arrive early and connect with some audience members ahead of time. That's an excellent suggestion.
You mentioned nonverbal communication. Do you recommend standing behind a podium, outside of a podium, standing still, walking around? What sort of recommendations do you have on body posture when up on stage?
You know, I think it really depends on the individual and the context in which you're speaking. For example, I like to speak in front of a group without anything obstructing me, so I would come out from behind the lectern or the podium. I realize that some people, based on their comfort level, they're not confident doing that. However, if you are going to use a lectern or a podium and have notes, there's a very strategic way in terms of the way that you do that. The only reason I say that is a few years ago, I had the opportunity to see Bill Clinton speak, and he stood behind the podium, and it was one of the best speeches that I have ever seen delivered. And he actually used notes, but the way that he used the podium, it was very, very effective. My personal preference is to get out and try and connect with audience members, but depending on the skill level in terms of how you use it, the podium or the lectern, it can be used effectively. I just think that the podium kind of acts as an obstruction to people that may cut the speaker off from the audience. So I would recommend that people don't use it. But again, it really depends on the speaker's comfort level in terms of how they use the podium or lectern to their advantage.
I think it really depends as well as if you're confident standing still rather than fidgeting and moving your legs and stuff like this. And or if you're going to walk around, that you walk around naturally, not like a robot back and forth.
True, and I call that stage dynamics. How do you use the speaking platform effectively in order to connect? Because you don't want to be going back and forth or sort of oscillating around. You want to be very strategic in terms of how you connect with your audience. So you want to make sure that you connect with people on both sides of the room, the left, the right, and in the center as well. So I think you're right. In terms of how you use the stage to your advantage, it's key, and that goes back to one of the other strategies that can help people to become an effective public speaker, and that's preparation and practice. If you don't go early and check out the venue or practice ahead of time, how will you as a speaker or communicator know what you're comfortable with in terms of speaking behind a podium or in front of a podium? So preparing and practicing is key to understand your own personal comfort level and also in terms of what is available to you. Because sometimes, Brian, I've gone to speaking engagements where I've asked for, a wireless mic, and they said, oh, all that audiovisual equipment will be there, and then all of a sudden they said, here's the podium, right? So I had to learn to be adaptable in my speeches because now I was planning to move around and I'm now stuck behind a podium, right? So I just recommend that speakers be flexible. And again, my preference would be for people to come out from behind the podium and engage with the audience.
So strategy number one was record your presentation on video.
Right.
Strategy number two is what?
So it's one thing to record yourself on video. It's another thing, you're not living in a silo, right? You need some type of objective feedback in order to improve. And
Right.
that's why I really recommend working with a mentor, a coach, or a trusted colleague who can give you that high quality advice to help you improve. Someone who has actually delivered presentations and that can help you. So for example, yourself, Brian, you've delivered numerous speeches, and perhaps someone who just graduated from university, they could look to you as a mentor and coach, and you could give them some really great feedback based on your personal experience. So I think it's one thing to see yourself on video, and then having the advice or quality feedback from someone who has delivered presentations in order to help somebody improve.
Okay. Strategy number 3.
And so strategy number 3, I sort of alluded to that a little bit, and that's about knowing some of the core fundamentals. Things like knowing what is the purpose of your speech, knowing your audience, knowing how to use your nonverbals effectively, how to use vocal variety, things like that. So that's strategy number 3, understanding.
I used to interact with this one guy who thought he was a debating champ, and he always had 3 things, and every speech had 3 things. Is that a good strategy to always have 3 things that you want to mention?
I think it is a good strategy. Sometimes when you give a lot of information, which I'm giving tonight, people can become overwhelmed. But I think if you can stick to some core messages, 3, 5, whatever the core number is, I think that will help your audience members to remember what they are. So I definitely don't think that's a bad strategy. But again, you could say 3 things, and you have to make sure that it's backed up with research and information as well. So again, you can say 3 things, but if it's not relevant to your audience, then those 3 things don't mean anything. You could list 1 thing, and that's the key thing or the key information that your audience needs, right? So 3, I think, is a good number just from a cognitive perspective. But I've gone to presentations where, scientific information was relayed, and it was more than 3 things, and all of it was important. So I think as a speaker, it goes to knowing your audience and what you want to convey. And if you have the 3 core messages and that works for you, then absolutely, I think that's a good strategy.
Your paper said that the other big strength or strategy is developing practical visualization strategies to deal with anxiety and nervousness. What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, practical strategies, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier, Brian, is that I have seen time and time again speakers come to a workshop room literally 5 minutes before they're going to go on stage, and then all of a sudden the PowerPoint presentation, it doesn't work, right? So, and you have a captive room of 50 people. So a practical strategy is arriving early and testing out your equipment, right? And the thing is, I think people are pretty forgiving if the stakes are lower. People don't want people to bomb. They want them to succeed. However, if you are in a high stakes environment and your boss has said to you, get out there and present the company's organizational mission and vision and values, and you bomb, I don't think that your boss would be very happy with you, right? So I think particularly when the stakes are high, and really at any time, it's incumbent upon the speaker to arrive early, test out their equipment to the best of their ability, right? So that's a practical strategy, arriving early, testing out your equipment. Another practical strategy is connecting with your host or the person who invited you to speak. So often people, they go into a situation blind, and I don't really think that's a good strategy. You want to connect with your host a little bit via email, phone, or ahead of time, and just to understand what their expectations are so that you can deliver in terms of what they really need for their audience. So that's a practical strategy, connecting with your host. And some other practical strategies have to do with exercises in terms of breathing. And I know when I was starting out way back, and even to this day, sometimes I do get a little bit nervous, right? You want to be able as a speaker to control that nervousness, and just physiologically, and it could be part of the excitement that you feel as a speaker. Sometimes you'll speak rapidly, sometimes you will just have a lot of anxiety, and just breathing slowly in and out of your mouth can help to calm you down physiologically. And that's just one of a practical tool that you can have, just doing some deep breathing exercises, and even some, I wouldn't say jumping around, though I know some speakers do, but just some exercises that can help to sort of shake out any nervousness that you may have. So those are some practical things. And in terms of visualization, I think people really underestimate that. For example, Olympians often use the visualization strategy to do well on the podium, and just kind of rehearsing your speeches in your mind, I think, is a really key thing. For example, if you're on the TDC or something to that effect, that you can just kind of in your mind go over your speeches is another great tool.
So I'll tell you mine. I'm standing up because what I
Yeah.
do before I go up on stage is I do warrior two. And I
Yeah.
always stretch out and I feel power. And I imagine the power going through my arms to other people. And when I do that for 10, 30 seconds before I end up doing a speech, I am more powerful when I
Right.
get up on stage. I've got more confidence. I've got more courage and I present far better. How's that for a good one?
That's an excellent one. There's another one too. I don't know. There's a Harvard professor by the name of Amy Cuddy. She has a book called Presence, and it's about encouraging people to do things like the Wonder Woman pose, where you put your hands on your hips, and you do something called the Y pose, and it just physiologically makes you feel more confident for whatever reason. So I really encourage public speakers to have those strategies, whether it's just physically getting up and move, whether it's listening to some empowering music to help you get energized and ready to present. So those are some practical strategies, and that's a great one. I'll remember that, Brian. Are you a yoga practitioner, obviously?
We're chatting with Deborah Austin tonight, a communications expert. We're going to take a break for messages and get right back to you, so stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Deborah Austin. Deborah is a communications expert. She went through Toastmasters. She's won numerous awards. She's got a certificate in communications and speaking, and she does seminars and workshops and coaching one-on-one on how to become an effective communicator. And I think that it's really quite important, all the time, but particularly during this time of COVID-19, when a lot of us are on Zoom or FaceTime or Microsoft Works or Teams or whatever it is, for us to know how to communicate, because speaking well and some of the other suggestions that Deborah's had in regards to body language, nonverbal communication are critically important. Deborah, I wonder if you can give me some examples of people that you've coached or met or worked with that have been incredibly good speakers or incredibly bad speakers, and what it was that you worked with them on to improve them.
Well, Brian, I don't think anyone that I worked with is or was a bad speaker, rather. I just think they needed a bit of refinement, and through my coaching, I really helped them. I like to give you two examples or case studies of people that I worked with that was such a great experience. And one of them was a gentleman by the name of Dave, and Dave was an MBA and an IT and business professional, and Dave had gone through a restructuring in his company, so he was in career transition. And how I became Dave's coach is that he reached out to me because he was a fellow Toastmaster. And unlike most people who send out their resumes in order to secure a job, Dave was actually landing interviews. So his professional background was great. He was an MBA. He had a lot of IT and business experience. But for some reason, when he went on these interviews, he wasn't sealing the deal. So Dave reached out to me, and when I started to coach him, I noticed a couple of things. So essentially the way that I coached Dave is I had him to do a self-assessment in terms of what his strengths and his weaknesses are. And then we began on doing some mock interviews. So from that first coaching session, what I saw with Dave was as soon as he entered a room, his non-verbal body language was not effective. His eyes were down, he had slouched shoulders, and he really didn't come off as a confident person and the person that I knew he was, which was a really intelligent, very caring, empathetic person who would have done great in any job that he was lucky to obtain, really. And so through working with Dave, we worked on some nonverbal communication, and that included having eye contact, being more confident in his body language, the way he greeted a potential recruiter or interviewer. So during our sessions, and there were 3 of them, each time he managed to enhance his nonverbal communication by becoming more confident, having good posture, the way he greeted me. Another way that I helped Dave was...
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I've got a suggestion on that regard. So 2 things that I've done that I think work reasonably well in that regard is when you go into a big room, too often people get intimidated, particularly if there's niches, groups of people chatting, and they don't want to interrupt that group and they become intimidated. What I do is I say, go find that person that's standing alone and just, say, what brought you here tonight? And who is it that you want to meet this evening? Why are you here, and who is it you want to meet? How can I help you introduce to someone? And so therefore, don't try to necessarily, unless you know them, get in the big group where it might be more intimidating. Go to the person standing on their own on the side of the room. The second suggestion that I've given people, and I try to do this not all the time, but most of the time when I'm going to a conference or a seminar or a workshop or something like that, is I check out some of the other attendees on LinkedIn. And I try to find someone that's got either something interesting in their background or some connection with me, and I send them a message and I say, you're going to the same seminar, looking forward to meeting you and chatting about football or chatting about we grew up in Markham together or some sort of a connection. And if you do that, then you go there looking for that one person and you end up having something in common and it's so much easier to start the conversation. Particularly, frankly, it's a connection you want to meet because it's a job opportunity or a business opportunity or a financing opportunity or something like that.
That's a great tip, Brian. And to me, that really is about rapport building, right, as well. So when you're able to make that one-to-one connection, I think that helps to, again, ease some of the pressure. But again, someone who's going in blindly, and they should have done some research, obviously, on the organization. And if the person has a LinkedIn profile, that's a great way that they can at least see the person's background as well. And I think it helps to break the ice a little bit when you're going into a situation that is blind as well, But I think it's important, too, to come off as confident when you're meeting somebody for the first time. And again, they said it's really difficult to reverse first impressions. I know we've all done it where we wish we could do a major redo, but the point of the fact, you can actually recover, right? So in Dave's interviews, my key message to him was, Dave, you have such a great background. Your educational background as an MBA is stellar. Right out the gate, you need to come across as a confident person walking into that room, greeting those hiring managers or recruiters confidently right from the start. So that was great, working on the non-verbal communication. Another way I helped Dave, Brian, is that when he answered his questions, he was rambling and going off on tangents. And I think a lot of job seekers, they do that. So I really encourage Dave to have 3 to 5 really good examples of projects that he worked on that he could actually relate to throughout the interview, which I think is key. So he was able to reference those key examples, and I helped to pull that together for him. And again, the third thing I really helped Dave with was helping him to summarize, starting off confidently, having those really good examples, and then again, just summarizing nicely at the end of the interview. And just through practice, he managed to get several job offers, and he found his ideal job. And I was really happy to help him because he was such a wonderful person.
Awesome.
Well, so
one of the suggestions that people give a lot of political candidates or other people being interviewed, which I think is applicable to your situation with Dave if he's sitting down for a recruiting type interview, is don't sit back and slouch in your chair. What you do is you put your hand behind your back and you have a fist between your back and the chair, which forces you to sit upright, and you look attentive, you are attentive, your body just can't help but be more involved in the conversation. And if you watch people, good politicians or other people on stage, if they're being interviewed, that's exactly how they're doing. And there's a gap between their chair and where their back is. They're not slouching back in the chair.
interesting. Again, another great tip, Brian. Thank you for that. I'm going to remember that as well. And the second person I mentioned earlier was Charmaine. And Charmaine, like Dave as well, she wasn't looking for a job. She was a small business owner. She was an image consultant. And again, a very intelligent woman. She was articulate. But I think when it came to her confidence, she needed some work. So she reached out to me, and I knew her again through some volunteer work. And we had several coaching sessions together. And what I really helped Charmaine with was her confidence, her presence. And what was a great tool to help her improve was recording her presentations on video. She was actually a little bit taken aback when she saw how she actually presented and came across. And just through my laser coaching, when she, did her presentations or performed her presentations, she was able to improve. Once she saw herself on the video, we would analyze it together. We would say what needed to be improved. And each time she would make those adjustments, and she kept getting better and better at her public speaking. Another thing I helped Charmaine with was develop what I call a signature speech. And I think that any small business owner or entrepreneur should develop a signature speech. And that really is about your credentials, your expertise, how you help people, some client testimonials or case studies that you can reference, and really how you can help a potential client. So I helped Charmaine to develop her signature speech, which she uses to this day. And this is about 3 or 4 years ago.
I think those are great case studies and suggestions. I do a fair amount of political consulting with people from a communication standpoint. And it's surprising to me how many politicians don't have that signature speech. When you think about the person that needs it more than anyone else, because they're going to be up on stage saying it over and over again, they're going to be knocking on doors saying it over and over again. And it's easy because it's like a product. You gotta have the answer about why you should buy this product. Well, for a politician, it's why should you vote for me? And they need to practice exactly the answer to that question in a speech. Why should that person vote for me? And I think it's the same for businesses. Why should you buy my product? Why should you come to my restaurant? Why should you buy my flowers, etc.? And so I think that signature speech is a critically good idea. So thank you for that. I also think, though, that it's helpful to have a signature story. And it's not appropriate all the time, but I do think that a lot of people have got the story. And for you, it might be that you were an introvert and your mom told you to go to Toastmasters. And so most people do have this story about their own life, this narrative about their life, which is the thing that may have beat them down, but they got up and accomplished and got over, that led them on to success. And it's those personal stories that really grab people. One of the guys that's impressed me the most in this COVID-19 is Governor Andrew Cuomo. I'm not sure if you've watched any of his speeches, but he ends every single speech, every single one of his presentations, he's been doing them every day, with some sort of a personal story. Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because, you start to wonder, another personal story. But then after the fact, it's the personal story you remember, not the hour before of all the facts and figures.
I think that's very important, Brian. I think sometimes, especially celebrities or politicians, it's very hard for people to relate to them because they're somewhere out there in the ether. And when you are able to relate a personal story, it really humanizes the person and it helps to build that connection. I actually have watched some of Governor Cuomo's press conferences, and you're right. He brings in stories about his family, his daughters, his brother. So I think that helps to really humanize him and help him to connect with his core audience, which is the citizens of New York. And you're right, having that key story, but I think sometimes people have a little bit of trepidation in terms of how much do they want to reveal. And I think sometimes in order to connect with people, you do have to reveal a little bit of yourself so that they can have that connection with you, because nobody wants to connect to a robot, right? They want to know that someone is just like me. They understand me, right? They've gone through an evolution. They've gone through a journey, and stories are so important to be able to connect with an audience.
Well, you mentioned Amy Cuddy, who's one of my favorite speakers, and I love her TED Talk when she talks about power poses and stuff like that. But one of the other ones is, I think it's Brene Brown, who talks about vulnerability, and you've got to be able to be authentic and open up and tell people your personal stories if you want them to connect with you and feel like you've made a message. And the best, maybe it's the worst, but the best example of that I keep remembering is the movie last year, A Star Is Born, where the old rocker goes up to the young ingenue, singer and says, if you're going to sing, make sure you have a message. Mm-hmm. And, that's pretty appropriate for, if you're going to speak, if you're going to make a sales pitch, if you're going to run for politics, if you're going to do any of those things, you better have a message.
Right. Absolutely. I think each of us, we come into this world, we have gifts, we have talents, and we have messages that we want to convey. And if I can communicate one of the messages to your audiences, that with hard work and determination, you can improve. When I think of myself, for example, I'm a speaker, a workshop facilitator, coach as well, and my personal journey. And it's very interesting that as an introvert, I was able to work hard. And don't forget, it's not just from Toastmasters. I was very involved also in other nonprofit work. And I got my degree, and I also have a college diploma from George Brown College, along with my degree in international relations from U of T. So people have to realize it's cumulative. It is your educational background. It is your professional experience. It is the volunteer work that you do that can all come together to enhance your communication skills, but you have to be willing to do the work. Like, for example, myself, Brian, my career has spanned so many different industries. When I was just fresh out of university, I worked at the Toronto Star. I was an editorial assistant and a student reporter. And then afterwards, I worked in IT and marketing communications, and then in the public sector before I segued into getting certified as a coach practitioner, right? So I think that no matter what industry you're in or the type of work that you do, you can learn valuable skills and apply them to your own development. Just like you're a person who's in business, you are a political consultant. So from all these, I'm sure business and politics, there's some commonalities, but in some ways they're very different as well. Because in business, it's about the profit motive, and politics, it's about the public good in a sense, right? You're dealing in public goods. So I would just want to really communicate to your audience that you can improve your communication skills by doing the hard work and realizing that no matter what field you're in, you can have transferable skills to help you improve.
We're chatting tonight with Deborah Austin, a professional coach in communications and speaking. We're going to take a break and come back for just a little bit more with Deborah in a minute. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Deborah Austin. She is a certified coach for communications. She's got a big Toastmasters background. She's got degrees and certificates out the whatever. She's got all the credentials you'd want to have. And more importantly, she's got numerous years of experience mentoring people, coaching people on how to get over their anxiety, get over their fear, and become better communicators. She does that both for a volunteer basis with charitable organizations and from a paid standpoint. And she's got numerous workshops that she does. Deborah, maybe tell us about some of the workshops and the titles of some of those workshops, if you could.
Sure, Brian. The workshops that I facilitate mainly focus on communication skills and leadership topics. Two of my signature workshops are called Become the Speaker That You're Destined to Be, and also the Fundamentals of Public Speaking.
What a great title. Become the speaker you're destined to be.
Absolutely. And as I was saying earlier, I truly believe that each of us, we come into the world with gifts and talents, and it's about honing and developing those skills and talents. And often I see people who really diminish themselves and they dismiss themselves. For example, one of the clients I was coaching, she was a professor at U of T. She was a French professor, and when I was coaching her, she was really dismissive of herself. And then she told me her life story. Brian, it was unbelievable. It could have been a screenplay. She left Africa. She went through a divorce. She had so many incredible things in her life that she had overcome as an individual. And there she was encouraging people. She was one of the most compassionate, kindest individuals you would ever meet. And yet she really discounted her qualifications. And through working with her, I just really helped her to see that, you know what, you have so many talents and so many skills and abilities. And that's why in the workshop called Become the Speaker That You're Destined to Be, I really help people to think about that. Like, what is your vision? What are your values? Have a look at your accomplishments, right? And you'd be surprised, Brian, if you were to sit down and make a list of 50 of your accomplishments, you'll be like, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, I remember when I did that, right? So I think it's really important that people look on their journey and really give themselves, not necessarily in a narcissistic way, but just the credit that they've deserved for the hard work and the journey that they've come through so far.
Well, that's a great suggestion. And the story obviously is compelling. And did she talk about that story in her speech?
Well, the thing is, she was doing workshops as well, but she was, I guess, a little bit more open to mentioning some of the things that she had gone through. And again, it made her more relatable to her audience. And I think after when we worked together, she became a lot more confident and she was willing to share. And I think you mentioned it earlier about that vulnerability. Sometimes we don't want to share parts of our story because we think that people will judge us. But a lot of times those vulnerable parts are the parts that people really connect with. So that was one of the key things that I really helped her in order to become the speaker that she was destined to be.
If people want to access some of your skills and hire you or go to one of your seminars, how do they connect up with you?
Well, thank you, Brian, for that opportunity. If people want to connect with me, they can reach out to me on my website. It's www.thebriancrombieradiohour.com, and Deborah is spelled the old-fashioned way, D-E-B-O-R-A-H, angelaustin.com. Angel happens to be my middle name. So people can reach out through my website. I have my phone number and my email address on the website.
I wish you had told me your middle name earlier because that's with me, Deborah Angel Austin. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're going to take one last break and then I'm going to come back with a couple of concluding comments. So stay with us. Thanks.
All right.
Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour Saga 960. We've had, I think, a really interesting chat with Deborah Angel Austin tonight, who is a professional communicator, and she's given us a lot of suggestions on how to become a more powerful, more confident communicator. And if I could draw some of the things from what she said, but also from my own experience, I think this idea of a power pose is critically important. And I do this Warrior 2. Tony Robbins talks about having the move. I used to listen to Earth, Wind and Fire's September as loud as I could on the radio before I went into a meeting, an interview, an exam, a pitch, whatever. But whatever it is that pumps you up, I think is so critically important, because you got to be confident. But at the same time, number 2 is you got to be able to calm down and slow down and breathe. And so therefore, getting yourself under control is so critically important. And when you think about the speech, you can't go fast the whole time, and you can't go slow the whole time. You've got to change tempo. And the only way you do that is if you're confident, but you're also under control and you breathe. I think the third thing is, as Deborah talked about, get to know some people. As I said, what I do is I try to arrive early, and I try to find some of the people either via LinkedIn before I even got there, or when I get there early, so that I can then recognize them during the speech. And I call them out and I make reference to them. And when you do that, everyone wakes up, because they don't want to risk being recognized without paying attention. And they pay attention, and they think, oh my God, the guy's connecting with the audience. And so I think that's very good. I think a little bit of humor is helpful. I think you've got to be authentic. You got to be vulnerable. People want to talk to someone who's not a rehearsed robot, someone that's actually speaking to them as an individual. And I think the final and most important thing is you've got to have a message. Don't just stand up and talk. Don't just use up airspace. Make sure you've got a message, and the message has got to be something that's hopefully compelling, that can actually help people in their lives. Anyway, that's my suggestions on top of Deborah Angel Austin's suggestions. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Deborah, thanks again.
Brian, thank you so much. It was a pleasure speaking with you tonight, and you added some great tips to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 every night, 6 o'clock, 9:60 a.m. or www.saga960am.com, or on my website, briancrombie.com. Thanks. Good night.